Mountain Man said, "Take off your clothes to obese girl he found in snow." What happened next? Strip her down and throw her outside. Let the snow decide her price. The gambler's voice, slurred with whiskey and cruelty, chased Rosemary Bennett into the black mouth of the storm. Glass shattered, a curtain of knives. Then she was in the night, stumbling barefoot into drifts that swallowed her to the knees. The wind had teeth. It chewed at her cheeks, at the cut on her lip, at the seams of a dress already torn by hands that treated her like a wager. Behind her, Blackwater's lamps dwindled to a smear of dull gold. Ahead, only white and more white, the world erased. She pressed a palm to her ribs where bruises bloomed, forced herself forward, and refused to look back at the house where her aunt had traded her dignity for a purse of coins. The snow silenced everything but her breathing. It came in ragged bursts, hot in her chest and useless in the air that burned like ice. She counted steps because numbers were steadier than fear. 12, 13, 14. The gale tore the breath from her throat. She bent, gagged, and tasted iron. When she straightened, the dark sky cartwheeled and the pines blurred, tall witnesses in funeral black. Keep moving, she told herself, though her tongue felt clumsy, though the edges of the world feathered and drifted. If she slowed, memory would catch her. The leer of Victor Kane, the way the room had laughed when she fought, the hiss of her aunt's voice. You should be grateful anyone wants you. She would not give them the satisfaction of finding her broken on the steps come morning. If she must fall, she would fall where no one could name her. A bargain. The storm thickened until up and down exchanged places. She tripped, pitched forward, and hit the drift with a thud that knocked the last air from her lungs. For a moment she simply lay there, listening to the low, endless hush of Wyoming winter. Snow crept inside her sleeves and collar, cunning, quick. The cold was not a sensation anymore, but a decision the world had made about her. "Please," she whispered, not sure to whom, "if I am to die, let it be as myself." A shape separated from the trees, more shadow than man at first, then resolving into breadth and height that did not belong to any town she knew. He moved with the dangerous economy of a creature that had learned the mountain's grammar. A leather coat flared, a lantern guttered, throwing a stern thatch of beard into relief, and eyes the color of deep water fixed on her. He dropped to one knee beside her. "You're freezing," he said, voice low and certain, already shrugging off his coat. "I've got you." "Where in the world are you listening from right now?" When Rosemary Bennett awoke, the world no longer screamed. Instead, there was warmth, a steady orange flicker, a crackle, a smell of pine sap and smoke. She blinked, expecting pain, but what came first was confusion. The low timber ceiling, the fur blankets heavy across her chest, the hush of wind pressing against thick log walls. Then she felt it, the coarse wool shirt that wasn't hers, the ache in her limbs, and the terror that climbed up her throat. "Easy," a voice said from somewhere near the fire. She turned her head. The man from the storm sat on a stool, elbows on his knees, watching the flames. He was enormous, broad-shouldered, bearded, the kind of man who seemed carved out of the same mountains that roared outside. His clothes were rough and patched, his boots caked with snow, yet his presence filled the cabin like something solid and immovable. Where am I?" Her voice cracked. "In my cabin," he said simply, 10 miles north of Blackwater. I found you half buried near the ridge." His eyes, blue as a glacier, lifted to hers. You'd have frozen before dawn if I hadn't. Rose swallowed hard, trying to sit. The movement sent a shock of dizziness through her, and she noticed that beneath the heavy blanket she wore nothing but an undershift. Her pulse jumped. "My clothes!" "By the fire," he said, nodding toward the hearth. Steam rose from a bundle of drying cloth. "They were soaked through and turned into ice. I had to get them off you, or you'd have been gone before sunrise." He paused, lowering his voice. "You've my word, ma'am, I didn't look where I shouldn't." Something in his tone, steady, respectful, almost formal, disarmed her more than any denial could. She clutched the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "You saved me." "I did what anyone would." She gave a short, bitter laugh. "No, not anyone." The man didn't argue. He stood, towering, and ladled something from the pot hanging above the fire into a tin bowl. "You should eat. Broth first. Slow." She hesitated, but hunger won. When the first spoonful touched her tongue, tears burned her eyes. It wasn't just the warmth. It was being treated as if her life still mattered. He set his bowl aside and leaned back. "What were you doing out in that storm?" The question cut through her fragile calm. She looked down, fingers twisting the edge of the blanket. "Running." "From what?" Rose hesitated, then forced the words out, one by one. "From men who thought I was a joke, from a house that called itself home, from an aunt who sold me to pay her debts." His jaw tightened, but he said nothing, letting her spill it all. The party, the laughter, the broken glass, the cold. When she finally stopped, the silence that followed felt different, heavier. He rose, paced once, then spoke quietly. "My name's Josiah Blackwood. Folks in town call me Joe. I don't go there often." He met her gaze. "But I know that kind of cruelty. It doesn't surprise me anymore." Rose studied him. "You sound like someone who's seen too much." He gave a faint, humorless smile. "Maybe, but I've seen enough to know a person deserves a chance to live without fear." Her lips trembled. "Why did you help me? You don't even know me." He looked at her for a long time before answering. "Because you looked like someone who'd been left behind one too many times." The fire popped, and for a heartbeat neither spoke. Then Joe rose, fetched her now dry dress, and handed it to her without meeting her eyes. "Get dressed. You'll feel better being yourself again. I'll step outside." He left, closing the door softly behind him. Rose sat there, trembling, staring at the dress in her lap. The scent of smoke clung to the fabric, mingled with something earthy and warm. Him. For the first time in years, she felt something unfamiliar. Safety. When he returned, she was dressed and sitting by the fire, her hair loose around her shoulders. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for everything." Joe nodded. "You can stay till you're strong enough to travel. There's no rush." Her heart squeezed. "And after that?" He hesitated at the door, snow clinging to his coat. "That depends on what you want, Miss Bennett." She didn't know how to answer. What she wanted was something she'd never dared to name. Peace, belonging, perhaps even a home. But for now, she only whispered, "I just don't want to go back." Joe's voice was gentle but firm. "Then you won't." Outside, the wind moaned through the trees, but inside the cabin the fire burned steady, a promise neither of them yet understood. The blizzard had calmed by dawn, leaving the world cloaked in silence and silver. Every branch wore a crown of frost. Every breath hung like smoke. Josiah Blackwood was already outside, splitting wood with clean, rhythmic strikes that echoed through the trees. Rose stood at the doorway, wrapped in a wool shawl. watching him. He moved with the slow certainty of someone who belonged to the land. The swing of his axe, the flex of muscle beneath his shirt, the steam rising from his breath. She had never seen strength look so patient or solitude look so whole. He noticed her and lowered the axe. "Morning. You shouldn't be out here long. The cold bites fast." She smiled faintly. "I've known worse things that bite." He didn't smile, but his eyes softened. "Breakfast's inside. I made porridge. Not fancy, but it fills the belly." Inside she ate while he packed his gear, a rifle, a coil of rope, and a canvas bag with supplies. "You plan to go somewhere?" she asked. "Gotta check the trap lines. Snow this deep, animals get desperate. If the traps freeze shut, I lose a week's food." He glanced toward her. "You'll be safe here. Keep the fire up. If anyone knocks, don't answer." The thought chilled her more than the weather. Will people come looking for me?" "Maybe," he said after a pause. "Blackwater's full of men who think they own what they touch. But I doubt they'll cross the ridge. Too wild out here." She nodded, though fear still fluttered in her chest. "Then I'll keep the fire burning." He studied her, this woman who looked fragile and yet had walked through a storm that would have killed most men. "You've got spirit," he murmured. "Don't lose it." When he left, the cabin felt larger, emptier. She cleaned dishes, swept the floor, fed the fire. The simple rhythm soothed her, but by noon, worry gnawed again. The wind rose, and the forest whispered secrets outside the walls. At dusk, she heard boots crunching snow. She rushed to the door, then froze as it opened. Joe stood there, shoulders dusted white, holding 2 rabbits and a flask. "You're still breathing," he said lightly. "Good sign." She let out the breath she'd been holding. "I was starting to think the mountain took you." "It's not my time yet." He hung the rabbits, poured water into the pot, and began skinning them. Rose hesitated, then sat beside him to help. Her fingers fumbled at first, but he guided her hands. Patient, sure. "Like that," he said, voice low. "Not too deep, or you'll tear the hide." She followed his lead, stealing glances at his face, lined, weather-beaten, but kind. "You've done this alone for a long time, haven't you?" He nodded once. "Too long." "Don't you ever get lonely?" He looked at her, then back to the knife. "The mountain doesn't ask questions. It listens. That's more than most people do." Her throat tightened. "I'd like to learn to listen like that." That night, after dinner, she sat near the fire, darning a tear in her dress while Joe sharpened his knife. Outside, the wind rose again, rattling the shutters. Rose flinched. Joe noticed. "The storm can't get in," he said. "Walls are thick, roofs tight." "It's not the storm I'm afraid of," she murmured. He set the knife down. "What then?" "The feeling that it's waiting for me, that someone will come out of it to drag me back." Joe leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "They won't reach you here, you have my word." Something in the way he said it, calm, absolute, steadied her. She nodded, but tears welled anyway. "You don't even know me, and yet you keep saving me." He looked at her a long time, then said quietly, "Maybe I know enough." Days passed, the snow deepened, and their small routines became a rhythm. Joe hunting or cutting wood, Rose cooking, mending, keeping the hearth alive. In the evenings they shared stories, hers hesitant, his sparse. She learned he'd once been a soldier, that the war had taken everything except his will to keep breathing. She also learned how silence could be gentle. Some nights they didn't speak at all, yet something wordless connected them. The scrape of spoon against bowl, the hiss of firewood catching flame. One morning, Joe returned with a sled loaded with supplies. "We'll need to fetch water from the creek," he said. "Ice is thick, but there's a pocket near the rocks. Can you walk that far?" Rose hesitated. "I think so." The path wound through trees heavy with snow. She stumbled once, and Joe caught her arm, steadying her. His hand was rough, warm through her sleeve. Neither moved for a heartbeat. She looked up. His breath came out white in the cold between them. "Careful," he murmured. "Snow hides the ground." "Thank you," she whispered. When they reached the creek, he knelt, broke the ice with his axe, and filled the canteens. Rose crouched beside him, cupping her hands in the frigid water. "It's beautiful," she said softly, "like glass." He smiled, a rare, quiet thing that changed his whole face. "That's the trick of this place. Looks cruel till you learn how to see it." As they walked back, the first flakes began to fall again. Slow, gentle, harmless. She glanced at him, at the strength in his stride, and thought, maybe safety isn't a place. Maybe it's a person. When they reached the cabin, he opened the door for her and said almost shyly, "Welcome home." Rose froze. Home. The word landed in her chest like a promise she didn't dare believe in. She stepped inside, the firelight wrapping around her like an embrace. For the first time since she'd run into the storm, she felt the cold leaving her bones. Winter in the mountains stretched on like a long, deep breath, slow, endless, and strangely comforting. For the first time in her life, Rosemary Bennett woke each morning without fear of footsteps outside her door. She would open her eyes to the glow of the hearth, to the scent of coffee and wood smoke, and to the faint sound of Josiah Blackwood moving about, boots against wooden planks, the clink of metal on tin. He didn't talk much. He didn't need to. There was a peace in his silence that the world had never given her. Rose soon learned that mountain life was built on rhythm. Fetch water, split wood, check traps, mend clothes, cook supper. Every hour had its purpose. At first, she insisted on helping. "I can't just sit while you do everything," she said one morning, rising unsteadily from her chair. Joe looked at her, the corner of his mouth twitching. "Didn't say you couldn't help. Just don't fall face first into the snow again." Her cheeks flushed. That was once. Once too many. But when she followed him outside, bundled in layers of wool and fur, she saw the faintest glint of amusement in his eyes. He showed her how to gather kindling, how to tell dry bark from frozen, how to strike the axe clean through a log. Her first swing barely scratched the surface. "It's heavier than I thought," she muttered, panting. Joe stepped behind her, guiding her hands on the handle. "Don't fight it. Let the weight do the work. Like this." The warmth of his breath brushed her temple, and for one fleeting moment she forgot the cold entirely. When the log split cleanly in two, she turned, triumphant, and found him watching her with quiet pride. "Told you," he said softly. And though he stepped back almost immediately, that small shared smile stayed with her all day. At night, the storm winds howled through the trees, but inside the cabin the fire burned steady and golden. Joe would sit near the hearth, whittling small shapes from scraps of wood, a bird, a tiny bear, once even a rough carving of a flower. Rose would mend socks or patch her dress, humming faintly. Sometimes he'd glance up and say, "You hum that same tune every night?" "I don't even notice," she'd reply, smiling. It must be the only one my mother used to sing." He paused his knife, listening. "It's pretty." "It's the sound of something soft," she said quietly, "in a world that was never gentle to me." He nodded, as though he understood perfectly. "The world can't help what it is, but sometimes people can." She looked up, meeting his gaze. The firelight caught the flecks of blue in his eyes, and she wondered what gentleness he had lost to make him so careful now. Joe never said much, but he showed his care in 100 quiet ways. When her fingers cracked from the cold, he left a tin of bear grease on the table without a word. When she coughed from the smoke, he built a small vent above the hearth. When she woke from nightmares, sweating, gasping, he would stay awake by the fire until she drifted back to sleep. Once she tried to thank him. "You've done more for me than anyone ever has." He shook his head. "You're alive because you chose to be. I just helped a little." "No," she said softly. "You did more than that. You made me feel human again." He looked away, his jaw tightening, and she wondered what ghosts his silence was still hiding. As the days passed, the space between them began to shrink in subtle, unspoken ways. One evening, she was cooking stew when the pot's handle slipped. Hot broth splashed her wrist. "Ah!" she cried, jerking back. Joe was beside her in an instant, taking her hand in his. "Let me see. It's nothing. Rose." His voice was firm but gentle. He examined the burn, brow furrowed, then dabbed it with a cloth dipped in cool water. His touch was careful, almost reverent. "You'll scar if you don't tend it," he murmured. She looked at his hand, scarred, calloused, steady. "You've got enough scars for the both of us." He smiled faintly. "Maybe, but I'd rather you didn't add to mine." For a moment they stood too close, the air thick with something fragile and unspoken. Then he stepped away, muttering, "Soup's fine. Just be careful next time." But his ears were red, and she caught the smallest tremor in his voice. By February, the cabin felt less like a shelter and more like a home. Rose planted herbs in clay pots near the window. She mended Joe's torn shirt and added an extra button. She even began to laugh again, a sound she had almost forgotten how to make. One morning, as sunlight broke through the frost-covered window, Joe found her sweeping the floor, humming her mother's tune. "You clean like you're fighting the devil himself," he teased. She straightened, mock glaring. "Maybe I am. The devil leaves dust wherever he goes." He chuckled, a deep, low sound that surprised even him. "Then you're winning." Her heart lifted. To make him laugh felt like earning sunlight in a place that had known only winter. That night, after supper, Rose sat near the fire, her head resting against the wall. Joe was repairing a broken snare beside her. For a long while, neither spoke. The flames threw shadows across his face, strong, weathered, kind. "Joe," she said softly, "do you ever miss the world outside these mountains?" He didn't look up. "The world took enough from me. I owe it nothing." She hesitated. "And what about people?" He finally turned toward her. "Depends on the person." Their eyes met. Something wordless passed between them. Recognition, gratitude, perhaps something deeper neither dared name. He set the snare aside. "You should sleep. I'll take the watch tonight." As she rose, she paused by him. "You're always watching over me." "Habit," he said quietly. "Old soldier's curse." But as she lay down and felt the warmth of the fire on her skin, she realized she no longer feared the night. Because somewhere in that same cabin, a man she barely knew, and somehow already trusted with her life, was awake, guarding the fire, and for the first time the darkness outside felt like peace instead of threat. The thaw began slowly that year. By late March, the snow softened under the sun, turning the paths around the cabin into veins of water and mud. Birds returned, first one, then dozens, singing as though the world itself had forgiven winter. For Rosemary Bennett, those days felt like a dream she never wanted to end. Yet dreams, she would soon learn, rarely survive the sound of boots in the distance. One morning, while Joe was out at the ridge, Rose found a folded piece of parchment tucked between the pages of his old journal. A letter, yellowed with time. The handwriting was rough, but careful. Rebecca, if the mountains take me, tell our daughter I fought to come home. I built this cabin for you, for her, for peace. J. Rose's hands trembled. She knew the name. He had whispered it once in his sleep during the coldest nights. Rebecca, the wife he had lost, the child who never drew breath. She set the letter down, feeling as though she had intruded upon something sacred, but curiosity ached inside her. Who had Josiah been before the mountains hardened him? What had he fled? When he returned that evening, mud on his boots and a fresh hair over his shoulder, she tried to meet his eyes, but guilt pressed her tongue still. He noticed. Something wrong. She hesitated, then blurted, "I found your letter." The world seemed to still. He froze, then set the hair aside. "You read it?" "Only a few lines. I didn't mean to pry, Joe. He took a long breath. "No, it's all right. I kept it there because I didn't want to forget. Sometimes pain's the only thing that keeps you from turning to stone." Rose's voice softened. "Was she like me?" That surprised him. "What do you mean?" "Her body," Rose said quietly. "Her shape. You said once she was round like me." Joe's expression gentled. "Aye, soft, warm, stubborn as the sun. People laughed at her, too. Said she wasn't what a man should marry. But they never knew what it was to have her arms around you on a night when the world tried to freeze." Rose felt tears sting her eyes. "I wish I could have met her." He nodded, eyes distant. "You remind me of her sometimes. That's not why I saved you, but maybe it's why I couldn't walk away." Spring brought more than birdsong. It brought riders. Joe spotted the first tracks 3 days later. 4 horses, heavy shod, cutting through the thawing mud near the ravine. He returned to the cabin silent and grim. Rose looked up from kneading dough. "You're pale. What is it?" "Trouble," he said simply, setting down his rifle. "Men from town. Probably looking for you." Her heart sank. "Victor Kane." He nodded. "Could be, or someone working for him." "What will we do?" "We'll be ready." Joe began checking his rifles, cleaning the barrels, counting rounds. Rose helped without a word, though her hands shook. She had seen cruelty before, but never like Kane's, the kind that smiled while it destroyed. That night she couldn't sleep. She sat by the fire, watching the flames. "Joe?" He opened one eye. "If they come, will you kill them?" His jaw worked silently before he answered. "If they force me to, and if they take me again?" He sat up, the flicker of firelight sharp across his features. "They won't. Promise me." He looked at her, something fierce and ancient in his eyes. "Rose, I'd burn the world before I let them touch you again." She believed him. 2 days later, the knock came. Hard, heavy, official. Joe opened the door halfway. Outside stood Sheriff Wallace, his badge dull under the gray light, 2 deputies behind him. "Morning, Blackwood," the sheriff drawled. "We heard tell you got company up here. A woman. Town's been buzzing about it." Joe's shoulders stiffened. "You heard wrong." The sheriff smirked. "Don't lie. We know she ran from her aunt's house. That girl's a wanted thief, stole jewelry, money, and fled with a man who's got no business hiding her." Rose's breath caught. "That's not true," she whispered. Joe stepped fully into the doorway, blocking their view. "You know Agatha Bennett's a liar. You'd believe her over me?" Wallace shrugged. "Doesn't matter what I believe. She's offering a $500 reward for the girl's return." The air turned cold again. $500, enough to make even decent men greedy. Joe's voice dropped low. "You'll leave now. No reward's worth the trouble you'll find here." Wallace's smile faltered, just a little. "You threatening an officer of the law, Blackwood?" "Not threatening," Joe said evenly. "Promising." The sheriff held his stare for a moment too long, then tipped his hat. "Fine. But this ain't over. She's property, and property always finds its way home." When they were gone, Rose's legs gave out. Joe caught her before she hit the floor. "I told you," he murmured, holding her close. "They won't take you." She clung to him, trembling. "But they'll keep coming, won't they?" He didn't answer. His silence was answer enough. That night, as thunder rolled far off in the mountains, Joe sat alone at the table, the old letter before him. Rose came to his side, touched his shoulder. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "If I hadn't come here—" He turned, catching her hand. "Don't say that. You were meant to come. But your past, your peace? My peace died with Rebecca." His voice cracked, raw. "For 9 years I waited for a reason to keep living. Then I found you in the snow." Rose's tears fell freely now. "I was broken, Joe. I still am." He shook his head. "No, you were never broken. You were just waiting for someone to see you whole." The thunder deepened. Wind howled against the shutters. She leaned her forehead against his, whispering, "Then stay with me. Whatever comes, stay." He pressed his hand against her cheek, always. Outside, lightning split the sky, illuminating the dark line of riders approaching the ridge. Victor Kane had found them. The storm was coming again, but this time it would not be cold. It would burn. The storm broke just before dawn. Rain hammered the roof of the cabin in violent sheets, turning the clearing into a swamp of mud and mist. Inside, Josiah Blackwood was already awake, fastening his gun belt with quiet precision. His movements were calm, but his eyes, dark and steady, carried the stillness of a man who'd made peace with whatever came next. Rose watched from the hearth, heart pounding so hard she could barely breathe. "They're really coming, aren't they?" Joe nodded, loading the final round into his Winchester. 5 horses, maybe more. I heard them an hour ago. They'll wait until daylight to move in." She stood, clutching the edge of the table. "We can run. The ridge path." "Too late. The ground's soaked. Horses are faster. We stand here." Rose's voice trembled. "You could let them take me. They want me, not you." He turned to her, and for the first time that morning, emotion cracked through the steel in his voice. "Don't ever say that again. You're not something to be taken." The words broke something inside her. She stepped closer, tears in her eyes. "Then let me stand with you. Don't shut me out." He hesitated, then handed her his old revolver. "If anyone comes through that door who isn't me, you aim for the chest. Don't think. Just pull." She took it, hands shaking, but her eyes were fierce. I'll do it." By full daylight, the riders appeared through the fog, Victor Kane at their head, face red and cruel beneath his hat. Behind him were 7 men armed with rifles, their coats slick with rain. "Blackwood!" Kane's voice tore through the storm. "You've got something that belongs to me. Send the whore out, and maybe I'll let you live." Joe stepped out onto the porch, rain soaking his hair and beard. "She doesn't belong to anyone." Kane sneered. "You think you can play hero? You don't know who you're dealing with." "I know exactly who I'm dealing with," Joe said, raising his rifle. "A coward who hurts women to feel powerful." The insult hit like a slap. Kane's face twisted. "Kill him!" The first shot shattered the morning silence. Bullets tore into the cabin walls, splinters flying. Joe ducked behind a post, returning fire with deadly calm. One man dropped instantly. Another screamed and fell into the mud. Inside, Rose knelt behind the table, clutching the revolver. The sound of gunfire was deafening. Smoke filled her lungs. "Joe!" she cried. "I'm all right." He shouted back, firing again. Kane's men tried to flank the cabin, but Joe moved like he was born of the storm, swift, relentless, unshakable. He shot 2 more before they reached the side window. One bullet grazed his shoulder, tearing through his coat, but he didn't flinch. Then the door crashed open. A man burst inside, rifle raised. Rose screamed and fired. The gun kicked in her hands, the blast echoing through the cabin. The man stumbled backward, shock frozen on his face, and fell dead across the threshold. Her ears rang, her whole body trembling, but when Joe rushed in, she looked up with wide, tear-filled eyes. I did it," she whispered. He cupped her face briefly, voice hoarse. "You saved us." Then he turned back toward the door. "Stay down." Outside, only Kane remained. His men were scattered, wounded or dead. The gambler stumbled through the mud, rain streaming down his face, hatred blazing in his eyes. "You think this ends here?" he shouted. "You'll hang for killing them. The law's on my side." Joe strode forward, rifle in hand, but lowered. "You can try to hide behind the law all you want, but it won't follow you into these mountains." Kane pulled his pistol, shaking with fury. "You don't scare me." The shot went off, wild, desperate. Joe moved faster. The crack of his Winchester answered, sharp and final. Kane dropped to his knees, disbelief in his eyes, then fell face first into the mud. Silence returned, broken only by the rain. Joe stood over the man's body for a long moment, breathing hard, before finally turning back toward the cabin. Rose was waiting in the doorway, drenched, trembling, but alive. When their eyes met, the rifle slipped from his hands. She ran to him and he caught her, pulling her into his arms as the storm began to fade. "It's over," she whispered against his chest. "It's finally over." He held her tighter. "It's over because you fought beside me." Her voice broke. "I was terrified." "So was I," he admitted softly. "But I'd face 100 storms for you." Rain dripped from the eaves, the clouds breaking to reveal a sliver of pale blue sky. The storm that had once nearly killed her had now washed the past away. The storm passed as swiftly as it had come. By evening, the air smelled of wet pine and earth, and the first shafts of sunlight broke through the thinning clouds. The mountains glowed like bronze in the distance, and a quiet peace settled over the clearing. Rose and Joe buried the dead men on the edge of the forest, near the creek where spring water still ran clear beneath the ice. Joe marked the graves with plain wooden crosses, no names, just a line of respect for what was finished. When he turned back, Rose was watching him, her hands folded, her face streaked with both rain and tears. "Do you think they'll send more?" she asked softly. He shook his head. "Cain was the kind that talks louder than he fights. The rest will scatter. There's nothing left for them to gain." "But the sheriff won't come this far again," he said firmly. "He knows I'll be waiting." She nodded, though her eyes were distant. The world she had fled, the lies, the shame, the cruelty, still felt too close, too real. Then Joe stepped toward her, removing his hat, the lines of weariness on his face easing. "You don't have to keep running, Rose, not any more." She looked up at him, her breath catching. "Then where do I go now?" He smiled faintly. "Wherever you want. This land's big enough for new beginnings." For a long moment they stood in silence, the sound of water trickling between them, the scent of smoke and pine drifting through the cool air. Finally Rose took his hand, small, trembling, but sure. "I don't know much about beginnings," she whispered, "but I'd like to learn, maybe here." Joe's fingers closed around hers, rough and warm. "Then stay. Stay till the spring thaw. After that we'll see." She nodded, tears spilling quietly down her cheeks, not of sorrow, but of something she had almost forgotten. Peace. That night the cabin glowed again with firelight. The storm's wreckage was gone, replaced by the sound of soft laughter, the simmer of stew, the quiet rhythm of two people breathing the same air without fear. Joe sat in his chair, sharpening his knife out of habit, while Rose sewed patches on his torn coat. The smell of coffee drifted between them. Outside, the wind sighed through the trees, gentle now, almost kind. At last, Rose looked up from her stitching. "Do you think the world will ever stop testing us?" she asked. Joe met her gaze, the corner of his mouth lifting. "No, but maybe it's not the tests that matter. Maybe it's who stands beside you when they come." She smiled, soft, radiant. "Then I'm not afraid anymore." He reached across the small table, covering her hand with his. "You're safe here, Rose. It's your home now, if you'll have it." Her eyes filled again, but her smile didn't waver. "Home," she repeated, tasting the word as though it were new. Outside, the last snow melted into the soil, feeding the roots for another season. And inside that small mountain cabin, under a sky slowly turning gold, two souls, once lost to the cold, found warmth enough to begin again. Every time I tell stories like this one, I'm reminded that love doesn't always arrive dressed in silk or spoken in grand words. Sometimes it comes through silence, through a fire kept burning, through a hand that never lets go when the world turns cold. If you've ever felt unseen, unwanted, or forgotten, remember Rose and Joe. Even in the darkest storms, someone out there is walking toward you with warmth in their hands. Where in the world are you listening from tonight? If you still believe in love that heals, stay a little longer. The next story is waiting for you.